Welcome to Writing Great IEPs. My name is Diane Reinhardt. I'm a transition consultant with ESU 13 in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and we have reached the transition portion of our presentation. There are some people that we'd like to acknowledge today to help make this slide presentation possible. We've used a lot of their resources. So we'd like to thank the Nebraska Department of Education, Department of Special Education, IEP Facilitation Cadre, that's a mouthful, and of course our knowledgeable staff at ESU 13. Like I said, I am Diane Reinhardt. Some of the objectives that we will be focusing on today, we're going to be talking about what transition planning is and why it's important, the importance of student involvement, and how the use of assessments help to establish and define goals for the student's IEP. We're also going to talk about the 8 indicators which need to be covered in the student's IEP through indicator 13. And we will talk a little bit about future planning as it relates to students getting services once they graduate from high school, and also guardianship and alternatives to guardianship. So what is transition planning and why is it important? Transition planning is a formal process for helping students who have an IEP figure out what they want to do when life ends for them at high school and they graduate and move into young adulthood. Transition planning must begin by the time a student turns 16. We are actually seeing a little bit of a trend and are encouraging people to start transition planning even earlier. So possibly in middle school, we can start looking at that. Students need guidance to transition successfully from high school to young adulthood. And if we help them take steps to address certain areas that are going to happen as they enter young adulthood, like their education and training, employment, independent living, will help them create a plan. And by developing transition goals, it gives a student a sense of empowerment and direction for their future. So a transition plan, what does it really mean? As we spoke just a minute ago, transition planning begins between ages 14 and 16, but it has to be in place by a student's 16th birthday. The activities in a transition plan, they need to be coordinated with each other. There is a huge team process that should be included with this. We're talking student, parent, outside organizations that will help in establishing the transition plan. The transition plan focuses on results. It is totally results oriented. There has to be a course of study that exists, and we'll go over that in another slide. And we also have to coordinate transition activities to help them along. All of these things, like I said, help them after they graduate from high school. So how do we do transition planning? Probably one of the key elements of transition planning is the use of assessments. And assessment data serves as a common thread in the transition process, and it forms the basis for defining goals and services that are listed in the IEP. So assessments come in a variety of different forms. They can be formal, they can be informal, some can be lengthy, some can be really short, but they do address a student's strengths and their needs and their preferences. And it is important to remember that the assessments that you use on a student, they need to be age appropriate for the student. So transition assessments cover a wide variety of areas. They address academics, they address rec and leisure, employment, independent living skills. They can assess how much a person knows about self-advocacy and their knowledge about their community resources. And if they are needing assistive technology, they provide information on that. So ESU here, we are very fortunate. We have a huge list of resources available, and I have included the links. Educators are able to click on the link. You can review the list of assessments we have and go ahead and click on that assessment that you're interested in, and we can send out a copy to you. A free resource that includes assessments is the Zaro Center, and I've also attached that link. Zaro Center prides themselves on really inexpensive assessments or free assessments for educators. So if you haven't heard of the Zaro Center, I encourage you to check it out. It truly is a great resource, and so there is a link there. When doing assessments, we can't forget about the parents. As you know, we see a certain side of our students that parents may not know about, and vice versa. So it is important to get the parents' perspective when assessing their child. You can send home assessments for the parent to complete. If that isn't always successful, a simple phone call, just saying, can I visit with you, and have some questions ready for them to answer, that they can help you get a more well-rounded picture of the students. So don't forget the parents, keep them informed and let them know what you are doing. So once we have the assessments, we use that data to establish post-secondary goals. And these goals are based on the student's vision of their future. And there are 3 areas that are required to be addressed. And the first area is education and training. Where is a student going to go to school, if they are going to go to school for higher education, if they're going to a community college or a technical school. What does their life look like and involve for their education and training? The other area that needs to be identified is employment. Employment is where they work, where they would like to work, how they are going to be productive. So employment, it's important to realize, doesn't necessarily have to be a paid job. It can be volunteer work if that is what the student is interested in, but we need to cover what they are going to be doing during the day. And then the last topic that needs to be addressed is independent living. Where is this student wanting to live and reside after they graduate from high school? There is, a multitude of options. Does the student want to live in their own apartment? Does the student want to live in an apartment but have a roommate? Is group home planning necessary? Are they planning to stay at home with the parents? So that also needs to be addressed when you are looking at post-secondary goals. Post-secondary goals, there are several things that we need to look at. Post-secondary goals need to be measurable, and they need to be reviewed at least annually. The post-secondary goals also need to reflect on the student's strengths, their preferences, and their interests. And as always in the IEP, it is just critical that the individual, the student, be involved in all areas of planning as they're capable to do. Post-secondary goals also need to become increasingly specific as a student gets closer to graduating. Some of the goals can be a little more vague in the beginning, but as they reach their senior year and their graduation is just right around the corner, these goals need to be more specific to address what they want to do. And they need to be written in a way to guide the development of annual goals and recommendations for transition services. The next slide here is just some examples. We've got numerous examples of post-secondary goals. Please feel free to look at those, get some ideas, see maybe how they are comparing to how you write post-secondary goals. So it is important to follow indicator 13. That is percentage of youth with IEPs ages 16 and above. That includes appropriate measurable post-secondary goals that are annually updated. And they are based on age appropriate assessment like we talked about. They discuss transition services. They also discuss the student's course of study. And they need to be goals that can be reasonably met to help them. There must also be, and this is very important, there must also be evidence that the student was invited to his or her IEP, and that needs to be documented. It's really important to always include the student in transition planning. It is all about them. And so we need to make sure they are invited and show how they were invited. Did you give them a note, an email? Did you invite them personally? The date that you did this. And then there also has to be proof that you invited a representative of any outside agencies. So outside agencies would be considered like Nebraska VR or Department of Health and Human Services Service Coordination. So make sure you invite those people and that you also document when you invited them. So here we have the indicator 13 checklist. This is through Intact. It's a great cheat sheet that you can use. It has you mark yes or no. Are you doing this? If so, mark yes. If you're not, mark no, what you need to do. So it is always a good idea to use indicator 13 checklist when you are writing your IEPs. Here's another transition IEP checklist. This was developed by one of our staff here, Pam Brzezinski at ESU 13. And it's very similar to the Intact one, just broke down maybe a little bit more. So questions to consider in the IEP. Is the goal measurable? Is a post-secondary goal measurable? It needs to be measurable. Have these goals been updated annually? Is there evidence that the measurable post-secondary goals were based on age-appropriate transition assessments? And are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable students to meet their post-secondary goals? Some other questions to consider: do transition services include a course of study that will reasonably enable the student to meet their post-secondary goals? Course of study are the courses listed by the year and grade all the classes that the students have already taken. Does the course of study relate to the student goals? Are they tied in? And does the course of study also follow the graduation plan, the exit plan for those? So course of study is always included. Again, as mentioned earlier, is there evidence that the student was invited to his or her IEP? And also please document if there is evidence that a representative like Nebraska VR or another community agency was invited to the IEP. And when you are inviting outside agencies, it is important to get parent consent for them to allow them in the IEP. So make sure you ask the parent, is it okay if Nebraska VR is invited to this meeting? There should also be transition activities documented. There is a wide variety of transition activities with instruction, teaching academics, work-related skills, community skills, and self-determination skills. Related services, this is a very important one. Transportation, occupational therapy, physical therapy, job coaching, any of those things. Their community experiences also need to be documented. So if they have taken trips to their local college, or if they have taken a visit to like a residential place, or if they have visited the Social Security office, all those things need to be documented. Employment and other post-secondary adult living objectives here, we're talking about financial planning, healthcare, self-advocacy and self-determination. Daily living skills, what are they doing? Are they learning to drive? Are they taking like driver's education? What are they doing to learn about their financial skills? Are they taking classes in financial management, checkbook management, things of that? Do they know how to make appointments to go to the doctor, how to refill medication prescription, all those things that cover self-sufficiency. And then also functional vocational evaluation, or the formalized employment assessment. And that is a slide that was provided by Intact. It really is important. You need to document the transition activities that are going on that the student is participating in, and you need to report the progress and how the student is doing on those activities. So let's tie it all together. You have to have at least one annual goal within the non-transition portion of the IEP that should relate to transition needs. I know many educators have more than one annual goal that is tied together. It seems that by doing that, the IEP, the process does flow a little bit smoother. So does a goal teach skills that the student can use in post-secondary situations? So it is important to make sure that these goals that you're creating they can be utilized by the student in their post-secondary situations, whatever that goal might be. So as we talked about before, the course of study is a multi-year description of coursework from the student's current to the anticipated exit year that is designed to help the student desire post-secondary goals. It must be reviewed annually. Again, we've talked before in a previous slide, all the courses that the student has taken need to be listed, when they took it, the year that they took it. Does the course of study relate to the student's goals? Are they taking classes that can be tied into and directly affect their student goals of becoming whatever they want to be? And does the course follow the graduation and exit plan? So we are going to talk a little bit about the age of majority. The age of majority in Nebraska is 19. This is when a child is legally considered an adult. The age of majority, like I said, in Nebraska is 19. It varies in other states. A lot of them are 18, but in Nebraska, it is 19. It's important to realize that parents do continue to hold educational rights and can make educational related decisions for their child while they're still receiving educational services up until the age of 21. So when a student turns 19, there are a lot of considerations that need to be discussed. The team needs to be confident in knowing that the student is able to make decisions on their own as an adult. And if they don't have some of those skills that are important, there are things that need to be considered. One alternative is guardianship. And guardianship is a legal process used when a vulnerable adult may not be able to make safe or sound decisions for themselves. Guardianship is always granted through a court of law. A lot of parents tend to think that they just can continue, because they are the mom or the dad, to continue making those decisions for their child. But in actuality, they need to go through a court of law to be able to legally make those decisions. There are two types of guardianship. A full guardian is appointed when the person requires assistance in all areas of daily living. And then a limited guardianship is appointed when a person requires assistance in a couple areas, but not everything in the person's life. So the powers of a guardian may include assuring the availability and maintenance and care of the person, making financial decisions, making medical decisions, making sure that the educational and medical services are maintained and adequate for the person that they are in charge of. And they are also required to submit updates to the court for the person that they are guardian for. It is not a decision to be taken lightly, because it does, guardian, especially full guardianship, strips that person's rights away for making decisions in their life. So there are some alternatives to guardianship that the team needs to think about. One, we are familiar with the power of attorney, and that is the authority to act for another person in a specific area. And a power of attorney is appointed by the client. They're designating that person as power of attorney. Representative payee, sometimes I've been in IEP meetings. A representative payee is only used for Social Security benefits. Social Security may require that a person help that student or individual manage their money, their financial benefits. Again, it is strictly through Social Security. It doesn't go before court of law. It's a paper that is completed, and Social Security form that is used. A new thing to consider is supported decision making, SDM. And that is when the person is able to keep all the rights, but they use selected people to help them and support them with making those decisions. So a person with a disability remains the decision maker, and they can just pick people, whether it's a parent, a friend, maybe a trusted advisor, or a trusted professional to help them, but they kind of are able to go to that person and get their opinions on things that are going on in their lives where a decision is needing to be made, and kind of seeking other opinions. But ultimately, the person with the disability is the decision maker. So looking towards the future, future plans for the graduating student include some type of day or residential service, and these are often known as DD services, which are funded through the Department of Health and Human Services Developmental Disabilities Division. It is really important to get the child's name on the state waiting list for funding prior to the time they graduate or turn 21 years of age. It is a really big decision, I know, for a lot of families. Sometimes it's difficult for parents to go that far into the future. Say their child is 14 and they're not going to be 21. Their child isn't going to be 21 for another 7 years. We encourage the family to get their name on the state list as early as possible, and that can easily be 14 years of age. When a parent places their child's name on the waiting list, it helps decrease the interruption of services when the student transitions from youth to adult services. If a student misses that time period and they graduate or they turn 21, they are going to be put on a waiting list for a very long time before they are able to receive any sort of day services, and residential is even more difficult to receive. So it is a matter of completing an eligibility application and going from there. But it is very important to discuss this in the IEP, because what we don't want is when a student graduates and some of these measures haven't been taken, and a student just remains in limbo for years and years until funding is available for them to receive day services, and that we just don't want to happen to them. Just a few things to consider. Make sure to invite people and to document when you did this. So the parents always need to be invited. The student, of course, needs to be invited. If a guardian is involved, the guardian needs to be invited, and then other outside agencies as appropriate. They also need to be invited. To me, it's kind of like, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. So make sure you document when you invited all these people. Document the method used. Did you do an email invite? Did you call the person? Did you formally mail them? Have evidence of this documentation. Document evidence of parent consent for the agency invites. We talked about them needing to give their approval before outside agencies are invited to their child's IEP. If needed, you may need to send an invitation more than once to make sure that these individuals are in attendance of the IEP. It doesn't hurt to send an invitation more than once. Just make sure that you document the method that you used and when you did it. Final thoughts, as we've kind of enforced through this whole series, I believe the I in IEP stands for individualized. So there shouldn't be any cookie cutter IEPs. I know educators have a huge demand on them, and the IEPs are a very long document and take a lot of time to prepare. But there should be consideration that each IEP and each student is different. So we need to be mindful of that. And as educators and other members of the team, we need to be mindful that it is the students' IEP meeting and their input is critical for a successful IEP. And finally, transitioning from high school to young adults can be uncertain and scary. And I really believe a well-developed plan can help ease with the fear and uneasiness as the student is growing up and entering young adulthood. So if we get a plan together for the student, they might not be as fearful of the future. I really appreciate you listening to this portion of the slide presentation. We have included some additional links for you. These are additional resources that you are more than welcome to click on. And if you are wanting professional development credit through ESU, please fill out the following Google form. And this form is linked in the comments below the video. Thank you very much for your time.